What's up, Lobster Boys? We got Jordan Peterson again with a conversation he had with Russel Brand. This is what a healthy disagreement looks like. And I'm gonna be reacting to this, so we're gonna hop into it. But first, please go press like below and press subscribe so you can see more content like this. This is all for you guys. And what I hope you take away is that you go check out Jordan Peterson and some of his other content. But for now, let's get right into it.
When you're moving through life and you have a plan or a dream and it shatters, you know, someone dies or a relationship breaks apart or you have a terrible upset in your career or you become ill in some unexpected way, then everything around you falls apart and you plunge into a chaotic underworld.
The belly of the whale.
That's exactly right. Yes, exactly that. And then maybe you stay there because it isn't necessarily the case that people get out. You know, people die. People are in despair permanently. But frequently, something tragic and terrible befalls you and you fall apart and you learn something profound as a consequence.
So frequently something tragic happens to you. Now again, I've spoken about this before in another video about Jordan Peterson's bias towards the negative. They say that if you focus on the positives in the world, if you think that the world is your friend and trying to help you, that's more likely to manifest. So he does have a little bit of that perspective there. He emphasizes the tragedy and the suffering and the chaos and all the horrible things that can happen to you. But at the same time, there's some redemption that's offered. Let's check it out.
You put yourself back together, and when you come back out, you're more than you were when you went in. And that's happening at a small scale. Every time you learn something, you know, if you ever really learn something, it's usually painful. It usually means that you have to recognize that you're wrong in some important way. You have to let that part of you that's wrong die. And then you have to let a new part of you. Okay, so the self, imagine that you undergo a series of transformations in your life. There are collapses into the chaotic underworld and then mini resurrections. That happens continually. And that's what molds your character.
Yes.
The self is this thing that manages the transformations across all those, that manages all those transformations. So you could say, here's another way of thinking about it. You could identify with what you understand. That's what ideologues do. You could identify with what you don't understand, and that's what sort of seekers after truth identify with. Or you could identify with the process of moving between those states.
So this is interesting, right? If you asked, you know, who are you? You'd be like, oh, well, you know, I was born here, raised here. I have these hobbies. This is what I'm doing right now. This is what I did in my past. I'm someone who's striving for this kind of thing in the future. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm looking towards business in the future. What he's saying is, who you are isn't you at any particular point. You're the thing that transforms. That's kind of weird, because how could something be something solid or defined or meaningful if it's something that transforms? Maybe it has to do with that pattern. Do you see how he's emphasizing that pattern there? If you see things in terms of these patterns, you can understand that you as a being are very complicated. And there are these patterns that describe your states over time that need to be examined. Let's continue.
You know, sometimes you know what you're doing, you know where you are, you're in control, and you can become arrogant and identify with that and then become too static about it, right? Or you can be in despair and everything is chaotic and you can identify with that, in which case you're nihilistic. Or you can view yourself as the thing that moves across the transformations. And that's the right way to conceptualize yourself, is you're the thing that maintains constancy across transformations.
One imagines that your experience with the controversies around the linguistics and legislation in Canada must have felt like one of those plunges into the depths on some level, would you say? Did you feel a sense of personal tragedy and fear and a concern about consequence, or that there may be no way back, that it could represent a kind of death? Or did it indeed represent a kind of death for you, for one for which you are subsequently grateful?
So what he's talking about is the Bill C-16 controversy in Canada. I think it was in 2016 when Jordan Peterson rose to fame. Part of the media controversy surrounding that, and part of that was his job was threatened, and there was a lot of stress in his life around that time. So we're going to examine that here.
Well, I would say for the first 4 months when the political scandal broke, it was very unsettling for a variety of reasons. The first was that my occupation as a clinical psychologist and as a professor was definitely in doubt. I mean, the university sent me 2 warning letters, and that's standard HR procedure, usually you get 3, right? The third warning is stop or their consequences won't be good. If you work in human resources, you have to, especially if you're going to go after someone with tenure, you have to document their misbehavior. You have to provide them with warnings. You have to tell them how they could get back on the right track. And then if you have documented refusal to comply with the warnings, then they have grounds for dismissal. So we're very worried about
You were
that.
close. You were close to to some kind of personal or professional annihilation or certainly damage. Now, for people, just in case on the off chance that there are people that are unaware of the details, I'll say it as I understand it, and then you can tell me how I've got it wrong. The government changed the law saying that there are neutral nouns that mandatorily would be applied to people identified as transgender. You said that is an imposition on freedom of speech, whilst I would make a decision whether or not I would. If I was meeting a transgender person, I would talk to them how they wanted to be talked to. The fact that you're making it law is an impediment on the freedom of speech, and then it kicked off.
Yeah, that's a good summary of it. Yeah, I would say. I mean, my sense, there were 2 things I objected to. One was that the government, for the first time in the history of Canada, and really in a move that was unprecedented in English common law, under English common law, actually mandated the content of voluntary speech.
Can we appreciate that Russel Brand is one of the few interviews that actually listened to what Jordan Peterson was saying? He basically said Jordan Peterson's argument, and we've seen in the other videos just how weird and distorted the questions were that they're throwing back at him about what he thinks, as if they're talking to someone else, or a mental construction of who they think and what they think Jordan Peterson thinks. Thank you, Russel Brand.
And I thought, I don't care what your excuse is for doing that. That's no-go zone as far as I'm concerned. That's not happening.
Even though, right, this is what it seems to me like help me to understand this, right? Because
Here we go.
What I'm always interested in, I think, is power and where power is.
Yeah.
And I subsequently looked at what your views are towards sort of post-structuralist and the alt-left, and a lot of things I think, yeah, you're right. That I agree with that.
Alt-left?
But what the reason I think that the sort of the controversy had fuel on both sides, the reason it had an engine on the other side, is because it seems that, and indeed having watched other interviews and the objections that other interviewers have presented to you, it seems to me that a transgender person is in a position of vulnerability. But you're saying this is not about transgender. This is about language and it's about oppression. That's what you're saying.
Well, that was my claim, is that this wasn't about transgenderism at all. And I would
about
say,
which you've got no strong view, I'm guessing, or
I don't have the sort of strong view that I would think I was sufficiently qualified to make political statements about.
yeah, like
It's very
Chappelle
complicated.
goes. I don't understand it, but it's not my.
Well, I basically look at the research, and I mean, the research for transgendered kids is quite clear, is that most of them desist by the time they're 18. And I'm basically guided by.
Where's
because
this
I'm a
in
social
Scandinavia,
scientist.
where they check that stuff out?
Yeah,
or-
yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, people have criticized that research, like all research, but it's the best research that's been done on the topic. But the other problem was with the legislation was that I felt that it was an attempt by the radical left to gain the linguistic territory and to define the terms of the debate. And I thought that was very dangerous. So I was objecting to that as well.
I feel you. Now, the thing that I'm interested in here, Jordan, is I don't feel like the radical left is a very powerful group. Am I being naive here? I mean, possibly in the world of academia, particularly, I feel like they are sort of representative of a coalition built around identity politics, issues that would seem particularly important to people. Like, my general view is, if you identify something, cool, no problem, it's none of my business. That's basically my opinion. I'll call you what you want me to call you. I'm happy that you're speaking to me. But do you see a sort of the sort of extreme left or as a powerful organisation?
Certainly in the universities.
So what, they can get what done? They could, for example, they could get that legislation passed.
Yes, that. And I think the situation is different in the US than it is in other countries. I think the political situation in the US is actually more balanced than it is in most Western countries, because I would say the radical left has a pretty decent hold on a number of institutions, and first and foremost of those would be the universities. But then the conservatives aren't without power in the United States, because they occupy most of the elected positions now. But it's not the case in Canada.
You don't want to be identified with any of those groups, am I right? Like, you wouldn't say that you're a person that's on the right or the left or conservative, or really. I noticed you didn't say whether or not you believed in God.
Well, my political views are complicated because I'm temperamentally liberal. because I'm high in openness, which is a creativity dimension.
So what he's talking about there temperamentally, he's talking about the big five or the ocean personality traits. Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So he's done research on personality and how that relates to political leaning. So people who are high in openness, and I think another trait, tend to be more liberal, and there's a different set of characteristics for conservatives. So he's temperamentally, his personality is that of someone who's more liberal. And he's also entrepreneurial. Like he's started certain ventures. Like he has ambitions with the money that he's made through the work that he's done and the books that he's put out. And so at the same time, it's like he has a good understanding of culture and history, and that we've kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater culturally. So he's in this conflicted position of kind of being a liberal person, being very agreeable. He said at different times he tests very high for agreeableness, and he's like helping people in his clinical practice. Like he's not someone who's very rigid and not open-minded and not able to listen. At the same time, like he has an understanding of like cultural institutions that is very nuanced, and he understands that there's some value to structure from history, and that we should conserve that, conservative, right? Not that the kind of like very far right people are very conservative. Actually, they're very willing to throw out cultural institutions for more rigid tyrannies, which is a different debate. But let's continue.
People who are high in openness tend to be liberal because they like free-flowing information, and they like, what would you say, fluid boundaries, because information can move back and forth across the boundaries.
Amazing.
So temperamentally, I like that.
Ideologically, you reject these taxonomies, and you identify basically on the basis of research, like empiricism in a sense. You can say, like, I'm an open-minded type of person. This language is clinical psychology. So your faith is clinical psychology.
It's research. I've done a fair bit of research in my lab on the temperamental predictors of political predisposition, and we can predict what parties people are going to align themselves with by studying their personality. So liberal left types are high in a trait called openness, and open people, you're a very open person. And you can tell because you think laterally, you have an idea, and then it reminds you of a whole bunch of other ideas. And so you'll move laterally across ideas. And a more conservative person, they'll stay within the category. And so your conversational style is marked by divergences. And that's actually called divergent thinking. It's a hallmark of creativity.
Good?
Well, it's good if you want to be creative. The problem with there's a price for everything, hey? The price for creativity is that it's hard to catalyze an identity, because you're interested in everything. That's the first thing. And your interest will flit from one thing to another. So one of the problems that creative people have, they have two. One is they have a hard time establishing an identity. And the second is they have a hard time monetizing their creativity. It's very difficult to be a creative person and make money.
Starving
artist. You can make money for other people, but usually you're dead by then, so it's not very helpful for you.
Jordan, both of those problems are as a result of external structures, the imposition of external structures on the individual, i.e. make money. That's a problem of capitalism and commerce more broadly. And the other one of identity, similarly. So is there a sort of a peculiar contradiction in around identity, in that, like, it seems to me on one level that you reject taxonomies. You're saying that these systems, e.g. if you say women are being paid less money, your argument would be, well, hold on a minute, there are other factors other than gender here. I don't agree with the data.
Argument. It's a funny thing, because the intersectional feminists always claim that you should take other factors into account, right? Woman, man isn't enough. White, black isn't enough. Well, I say, well, there's a pay gap between men and women, but it's not only due to gender. It's due to all sorts of things, and you have to take them into account. So it's really an intersectional argument. So it's quite funny that I get held for it.
It's an intersectional argument. So do you feel then, because what I sense is happening, like trying to understand where like our worldviews would align and where potentially there would be opposition between you and I.
So you see what's going on, like the way he just he put it out there. He's like, I'm trying to identify where we align and where we might potentially disagree. This is not heated language at all. This is a beautiful discussion. You see how like Jordan Peterson gets to speak, they get to build on it, he gets to challenge it a little bit, but it's done in good faith. This is what good faith discussion looks like.
Well, I'm trying, because it seems to me, looking at your work, it's like, I don't agree with the way that this information is being compiled. I don't agree with the assumptions that you're trying to saddle that piece of data with. It seems to me that it's about critical thinking, a very post-structuralist idea, But also, what I have noticed is that many of your theories seem to be subsequently alloyed to some unpleasant ideas around sort of tradition, conservatism, oppression, even. How do you feel about that? Because, like, it would be well easy for you to, like, I think you have said, I don't care about whether people are transgender or not. I just don't want no oppressive laws around language. But it would also be easy for you to say, I don't think there's any, I've heard you say on the news, fairness. But it does seem that there is some mischief somehow in you around the issues such as gender inequality.
Well, there's probably lots of mischief in me around all sorts of things. But I think that mostly I look at the political landscape from the perspective of an informed, biologically oriented social scientist. And so when people lay out their particular theories, they don't sound outdated to me.
All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. That's Jordan Peterson. That was a beautiful discussion. I love when people can find agreements, when they can find disagreements, when there's back and forth, when they can actually really dig deep. Right there, they finally got somewhere that none of the other videos ever got to. Go check out Jordan Peterson's stuff. Russel Brand is also amazing. He has an amazing book out there. I'd encourage you to check it out too. Again, thank you for watching. Please click that like button. Please click subscribe, and I'll see you guys later in the next video.